Around Dinarland June 10, 2017. First up from Don 961. They will get the rest of the loan when agreements are adhered to. Teepnable 53. Well, it appears the long line is alive and quite active. Iraq even managed to get a draw on the agreed loans. When dealing with bankers and loans, it is always the same two questions: when and how are we going to get paid back? Evidently this was answered to their satisfaction, otherwise Iraq doesn't receive an advance, let alone the loan approved. More evidence that the MR is moving forward, so what are you worried about? Thank you Don961. Another gem from Sabri. $14 billion, the size of the loans obtained by Iraq, he said. A spokesman for the office of the Prime Alaza Saad Sabri said the loans obtained by Iraq so far from a number of countries and organizations through the International Monetary Fund amounted to about $14 billion, indicating that those loans were signed by the best global conditions. Said Sabri in a statement that Iraq has a number of agreements signed with a number of countries including Japan, France, Germany, the United Kingdom and the World Bank, ODAC, to regional and international donor organizations in the Run Credit program signed by Iraq with the International Monetary Fund in a move to bring life back into the Iraqi economy and the reform of the administrative system, as well as finding sources of income to fill the deficit in the federal budget of the Republic of Iraq for the fiscal year 2017. Sabri added that the amounts that will enable Iraq to get them so far amounted to about $14 billion offer to 3 years and during the period of not more than 2019, noting that Iraq received a portion of that amount. From BIOS 45. Nukin says U.S. Kinko PIF debt ceiling not raised by August by Salha Mohsin and Andrew Maeda. June 9, 2017. 12:30 p.m. PDT government has backup plans if limit not lifted in time, critical not to disrupt financial markets. Treasury chief says the U.S. government has backup plans for funding itself if Congress doesn't raise the debt limit before lawmakers leave for their August recess as hoped, Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin said. I don't want to leave any doubt, we have plans, backup plans for funding the government, Mnuchin told reporters Friday at a press conference in Ottawa with Canadian Finance Minister Bill Morneau. We will be fine if they don't do it beforehand, but I want to emphasize that the sooner they do it, the less uncertainty there is in the market, he said. While the government hit its borrowing limit in March, it's been relying on special accounting maneuvers to keep spending under the current ceiling of nearly $20 trillion. Increasing the debt limit, a responsibility of Congress, has become increasingly fraught in recent years as lawmakers used the debate as a bargaining chip for spending controls. Mnuchin acknowledged that tax revenue is coming in somewhat lower than expected as a result of anticipated tax cuts, though he added that he's not concerned. He repeated on Friday that the administration aims to complete an overhaul of the tax code this year. The Treasury Department has projected it will run out of money in the second half of the year. Receipts totaled $2.17 trillion in the 8 months through May, about 3% lower than projections, the Congressional Budget Office said in monthly projections this week. Asked to elaborate on the administration's backup plans, Mnuchin joked that he would use his Treasury Secretary superpowers to solve the issue, referring to special accounting measures to remain below the ceiling. The U.S. credit is the most important and the strongest in the world, and we will make sure we do everything to make sure we can continue on that, he said. From Frosty the Snowman. Oh, the places you'll go. What's on your post-RV travel list? Mrs. Frosty says she'd like a trip to Tahiti. I'd settle for a trip to the bank. Wink, Africa, is China's Belt and Road Initiative just a bedtime story? Photo. The Conversation, Africa, China's proposed One Belt, One Road route map. Analysis by Peter Fabricius. Once upon a time several routes led from China to Central Asia and to Europe. It was called the Silk Road. People put things on camels and crossed the desert to trade with other people. Then later, ships traveled through Southeast Asia to Africa and they would bring things back to China, like giraffes. A few years ago China's President Xi Jinping proposed making new routes like the old routes. But even bigger. It's called the Belt and Road Initiative. This is Baba explaining Eleven's ambitious new project, in simple terms, to his young daughter in episode 1 of Belt and Road Bedtime Stories. This is a series of films produced, with a perfectly straight face, by the state-owned English-language newspaper China Daily to publicize the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, previously known as One Belt One Road. Though 11 announced BRI in 2013, the bedtime stories were transmitted on the eve of the BRI Forum, which 11 hosted in Beijing last month to officially launch the project. About 110 governments and international organizations attended. China could funnel investments worth $1 trillion into BRI participating countries. The belt roughly follows the old overland Silk Road which Marco Polo pioneered in the 13th century, linking China to Europe. The road follows the ancient maritime Silk Road from China, through Southeast Asia and then across the Indian Ocean to East Africa and northwards through the Red Sea. So is the BRI a romantic bedtime story to lull the world into a sense of false security as China creates a Eurasian trading bloc and zone of influence across the eastern half of the planet, to rival the US-dominated transatlantic zone? Is it just a way for China to get rid of its immense surplus productive capacity and labor and to create new markets for its exports? Is it a way to externalize floods of renminbi to try to establish the Chinese currency as a rival to the US dollar? All these skeptical interpretations have been offered. Or is it rather, the most ambitious development plan in world history, as others have called it? Something like America's post-World War II Marshall Plan to reconstruct Europe, which could boost development across Southeast Asia, South Asia, Central Asia, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and Africa? Or perhaps it's all of the above, suggests Glenn Ho, China specialist at KPMG South Africa. However China sees it, he says it will create lots of economic activity in the countries along the route and should be taken seriously and exploited. He notes that many skeptics were silenced when the first train traversed the belt between China and the UK, reaching London from Yiwu in central China in January this year, carrying t-shirts, textiles, and other goods. It cut 4 weeks off the sea journey, though the cost was about twice as much. At about the same time, the first oil was being pumped from Kyaukphyu port in Myanmar to Kunming, capital of China's Yunnan province. The new pipeline bypasses the sea route through the Straits of Malacca and South China Sea, both strategic bottlenecks, through which 80% of China's oil passes. These two early projects epitomize vital aspects of the BRI, the trade dimension and for China, the security dimension. A recent Credit Suisse report has suggested that China could funnel total investments of $502 billion into infrastructure projects in countries participating in the BRI, though some put that figure as high as $1 trillion. These projects include power plants, solar farms, motorways, bridges, ports and high-speed rail links. This will come from a $100 billion dedicated Silk Road Fund as well as money from Chinese banks, state-owned enterprises, the Chinese-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Shanghai-based New Development Bank run by BRICS, the Association of Emerging Markets comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Could the BRI focus on East Africa and knock SA off its pedestal as Africa's industrial heartland? Many commentators believe the BRI was inspired by seismic shifts in the Chinese economy, away from the old focus on industrial production for export towards internal consumption-led growth. That has created the surplus production and labor capacity that Beijing is seeking to export to countries along the Belt and Road, also creating new markets for Chinese goods. And 11 may also be taking advantage of a fortuitous opportunity to extend China's economic and political influence as a world leader, capitalizing on a moment of American global capitulation under an isolationist and unilateralist President Donald Trump. What does this all mean for Africa? Most maps show the maritime road of the BRI crossing the Indian Ocean to touch down in Kenya/Tanzania and then snaking northwards, taking in Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Ethiopia, Somalia, Djibouti, Eritrea, Sudan, and Egypt to the Mediterranean. Kenya, and particularly its main port of Mombasa, look like the focal point. Last week Kenya and China launched the single-track, 485 kilometers Mombasa-Nairobi line, the first leg of the proposed $14 billion standard gauge railway, SGR, which will eventually reach Uganda. The first leg was largely built by China, which also provided a loan to cover about 85% of the total $3.8 billion official cost. The SGR, replacing the precarious 19th century, British-built, 1M gauge Lunatic Express as it was called, is a typical BRI project, opening up the East Africa interior more efficiently to Chinese manufactured imports and African resource exports. China has already largely built and financed landlocked Ethiopia's electrified railway to the Red Sea at Djibouti and several other regional infrastructure projects. As with other big projects along the Belt and Road, many criticisms have been leveled at the SGR. The Economist Intelligence Unit has noted that the completed first leg cost more than twice the international norm per kilometer, the likely result of a lack of tendering for the project and probable corruption. China has also been accused of breaking its promise to source at least 40% of goods and services for the project locally. But it is a fait accompli. There are also grave dangers for African countries like Kenya in taking on unaffordable debt for such large infrastructure projects. And what of African countries not on the actual route? China and the African Union, have not signed any formal agreement on the BRI, although China has made it clear that participation is open to all countries, not just those on the Belt and Road routes. And South Africa, for example, signed a formal agreement to cooperate on the BRI in December 2015, which also looked towards broader China-Africa cooperation. The first China to UK train in January cut 4 weeks off the sea journey. We believe that South Africa has much to contribute to the BRI as a major power on the African continent, and we are willing to join efforts with South Africa to better align the BRI and Africa's development and achieve mutually beneficial and win-win growth, the Chinese embassy in Pretoria told ISS today. But Pretoria sent only its transport minister, Joe Maswanganyi, to the BRI forum last month, suggesting relatively low interest in the BRI. KPMG's Ho suggests South Africa should pay more attention to the BRI. He sees the BRI acting as a catalyst for construction of continental west-east railways to link with the East African SGR. This would make Kenya and East Africa the hub for African trade with the Middle East, Central Asia, and Europe along the BRI. Such a corridor could also link the BRI to westward trade with the Americas, shortening the sea routes around the Cape. If Africa becomes a new manufacturing hub and breadbasket for the world, as some predict, these would be its routes to global markets. This development could be the catalyst for the long-deferred construction of the Mega Grand Inga hydroelectric plant on the Congo River. All that development in East Africa could bypass South Africa's ports and knock the country off its pedestal as Africa's industrial heartland. We need to get our act together, says HO. South Africa should be positioning itself to get on the BRI, for instance by using cheaper labor elsewhere in Africa for broader manufacturing while focusing its own dearer labor on niche manufacturing at home. The BRI Express is clearly leaving the station and all countries need to decide where it's going, and if they have a seat on the train. Peter Fabricius, ISS consultant. More from Frosty the Snowman. If things are on a roll, and if Abadi is where he wants to be. This is where my mind goes. So we see that things start to escalate quickly this week. It is interesting to me all of those documents by the CBI stating for contractors to start work regardless of what the Ministry of Finance is doing. Then, on the 8th, CBI is telling MOF to get ready to start paying them. It's like they know something is coming. The budget perhaps. So I think, it was about a week ago that the budget was talked about, and the can was kicked down the road. A week. So let's just say that they want the new rate before budget is signed into law. Would you want that done after the announcement if you are Abadi? Or would you want it done invisible to the populace before the celebration on the 12th, so you can say, hey Iraq, we are a sovereign people again. Here's what I have done for you, you now have food to buy, your streets are safe, the days are gone, and are never coming back. Your borders are secure, you have internet, you have mobile banking, you have money, your money, and it's worth something. This is your Iraq. We are sovereign. It just seems to me that he announces everything at the same time. And everything is there and ready to go. Next from Rayren98. We've been tracking everything. Let's see what happens when the market closes. The 10th is the anniversary of ISIL coming in and going out. Some believe announcements will commence on the 10th for the full release. We have celebrations for the troops scheduled on June 12-13. Someone said that the UN rates are posted on the 15th, so some are looking at that date. Then there are no expected dates until the 30th. There is a rumor that Dong will be revalued before the dinar, which will give us a great leveraging opportunity, if it happens. This ride is coming to an end, we just don't know the exact date. End of report. More at